The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet town. In the stillness of the evening, a single figure moved swiftly through the streets, their footsteps almost inaudible against the soft hum of the city. But something was different about tonight. It wasn't just another ordinary evening. Something was about to happen, something that would change everything. And as they turned the corner, their hearts skipped a beat, for in front of them stood an old, weathered door, one that had been locked for years. Inside, the secrets of the town were buried, hidden behind layers of time and silence. No one ever dared to talk about it. The rumors, the whispers, everyone knew there was something strange about the old mansion at the end of the street. But what if it wasn't just the rumors? What if there was more to the story? Anna, our protagonist, had lived in this town her whole life. She knew the stories, of course. Who hadn't heard about the strange disappearances that plagued the town decades ago? The old mansion was supposed to be abandoned, yet Anna could never shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her from behind its dusty windows. Tonight, however, something felt different. She wasn't the only one who had noticed the change. Her best friend, Jake, had been acting strange for weeks. At first, it seemed like a harmless phase, but the closer they got to the mansion, the more Anna realized that Jake wasn't the same. He was obsessed with it, almost as if he had uncovered a secret he wasn't ready to share. But what secret? That was the question Anna couldn't answer. Not yet. The closer they got to uncovering the truth, the more dangerous it seemed. Was it just her imagination, or was someone, or something, trying to stop them from getting closer to the mansion? She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that every step they took brought them closer to something they weren't ready for. As Anna and Jake stood at the doorstep of the mansion, a chilling wind swept through the air, carrying with it a strange, unsettling sound. It was almost like a whisper, but Anna couldn't make out the words. Her heart raced as Jake hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering just above the old doorknob. The tension was thick, almost suffocating, and Anna could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Should they go in? Or was it too late to turn back? Just as the door creaked open, a loud noise shattered the silence, something heavy falling to the ground inside. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Was someone already inside? Or was it something worse? With a look of determination, she stepped forward, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. But before she could take another step, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The darkness inside the mansion seemed to swallow them whole, and all at once, the mystery grew even deeper. What lay behind that door? And who, or what, was waiting for them inside? Anna and Jake were about to find out. But would they survive the truth? Or was it already too late? The adventure had only just begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. The door slammed shut with an intensity that rattled the air, leaving Anna standing in the dim light of the entryway, her breath shallow and her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, all she could hear was the sound of her own racing pulse. Jake stood next to her, his hand still hovering where the doorknob had been just moments before, his expression unreadable. He didn't move, didn't speak. The silence between them felt heavier than the night itself, as though the mansion was waiting for them to make the next move. But what could they do? The door wouldn't open again. Anna's mind was a whirlwind of questions. What was that noise inside? Had someone, no, something, moved in the darkness? Her eyes darted around the entryway. The walls, lined with peeling wallpaper, seemed to stretch infinitely into the shadows. Old portraits of long-forgotten faces stared down at them, their eyes cold and lifeless. The air smelled of dust and decay, yet there was an undercurrent of something else, something metallic, something that tugged at the back of Anna's mind. Jake broke the silence, his voice low and uncertain. "We should leave. This place isn't right." Anna's stomach tightened at the sound of his voice, but she wasn't ready to leave. Not yet. She had come this far, and something inside her refused to let fear dictate her choices. She turned to Jake, her voice steady despite the chaos of thoughts in her head. "We can't leave now. We need to know what's inside. We've been talking about it for years, Jake. I'm not turning back." Jake shifted uneasily, his eyes flickering to the mansion's darkened interior. "I don't think it's the same as before. I saw something. It's different." Anna felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step back, his gaze darting nervously to the shadows that seemed to stretch further into the house. The longer he hesitated, the more Anna's anxiety grew. She had known Jake for years. He wasn't the type to get worked up over nothing. If something had shaken him, it wasn't just his imagination. Suddenly, there was a soft sound from deeper within the mansion, barely audible but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Anna's breath caught in her throat, and she stepped closer to Jake. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jake nodded, his face pale in the weak light. "I don't think we're alone." Without another word, Anna reached for the door handle, determined to get inside. As her fingers brushed the cold metal, the door creaked open slowly, too slowly, as if resisting her touch. She felt a wave of unease wash over her, but there was no turning back now. They had crossed a line. They had opened the door, and it was up to them to face whatever lay beyond. The interior of the mansion was just as foreboding as the outside. High ceilings, long corridors shrouded in shadow, and an unsettling stillness that clung to every corner. Anna stepped into the darkness, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The faint sound of wind howling through broken windows made the place feel alive, as if it were breathing. Jake lingered behind her, his hesitation palpable, but he followed her nonetheless. They moved through the entrance hall, their footsteps muffled by the thick dust on the floor. The air was cold, biting at their skin like an unseen presence. It was as though the mansion itself was waiting for them to uncover its secrets. But at what cost? A staircase loomed ahead, its steps worn and creaking under their weight. But it wasn't the stairs that held Anna's attention. It was the door at the end of the hallway. It stood ajar, as though someone had just left it that way. And behind it, she thought she saw a faint light flickering. Could it be a reflection? Or was someone still inside? Anna's heart raced. She couldn't explain why, but she felt compelled to go toward it. With a quick glance at Jake, she started toward the door. He didn't protest, but she could see the fear in his eyes, the uncertainty that had taken root. But something had shifted in Anna. She could feel it deep in her bones. Whatever this was, whatever they were about to find, they needed to see it through. As they approached the door, the light flickered again, casting strange shadows across the walls. Anna reached for the handle, but just as her fingers touched it, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire hallway. The sound reverberated in the stillness, a deafening reminder that they were not alone, and that whatever was inside wasn't ready to reveal itself just yet. The tension between them was thick now, and Anna couldn't help but wonder if they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The door remained shut, but Anna could still feel the pressure of the unseen force behind it, as though it were pushing back against her very will. She pressed her ear to the cold wood, listening for any sign of movement, but there was only silence, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. Jake was standing just behind her, his presence a constant reminder of how far they had come, but also of how far they could fall. She turned to him, her face tight with frustration. "What's happening, Jake?" This isn't just in our heads. Something's going on here. Don't you feel it? Jake looked away, as though the weight of her words was more than he could bear. His eyes, usually steady, now darted nervously from the door to the shadows around them. He shook his head slowly, his voice barely audible. I don't know, but something's not right. It feels like we're being watched, like there's something here. Something that doesn't want us to find out the truth. Anna's pulse quickened. She didn't need him to confirm her worst fears. She could feel it too. Whatever it was waiting. And it wasn't going to let them leave until they discovered its secret. Without thinking, Anna pushed the door again. This time, it creaked open a fraction, just enough to reveal a sliver of light spilling from the room beyond. Her heart raced in her chest. She could feel the air shift, heavy with anticipation, as if the mansion itself was holding its breath. With a swift motion, she pushed the door open fully. What they saw inside made her freeze. The room was large, its walls lined with old bookshelves and dusty, abandoned furniture. But it was the center of the room that caught her attention. There, in the middle of the floor, stood a tall, ornately carved mirror. Its surface gleamed unnaturally in the dim light, as though it were reflecting something beyond the room. Something alive. Jake gasped behind her, his hand flying to his mouth. What the hell is that? Anna couldn't tear her eyes away from the mirror. There, in its reflection, was the image of a figure, pale, gaunt, and impossibly still. At first, Anna thought it was a trick of the light, some shadow playing across the surface. But as her gaze sharpened, she realized it was something far more unsettling. The figure in the mirror wasn't reflected properly. Its movements were delayed, almost as if it existed in a different dimension, one where time and space didn't behave the way they should. The figure in the mirror slowly raised its hand, and Anna's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was alive. She could almost feel its presence, like cold fingers brushing against the back of her neck. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, so soft at first that she thought she had imagined it. *leave star. The word echoed in her mind, sharp and commanding. Anna spun around, looking desperately for the source of the voice, but there was no one there. Just the empty, oppressive air of the mansion closing in around them. Jake took a step back, his face pale as he grabbed Anna's arm. We need to get out of here now. This place, whatever it is, it's not safe. But Anna couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the mirror, the figure's hollow eyes staring back at her. There was something about it, a connection she couldn't explain, something that called to her. It was as if the figure was waiting for her to take the next step, to move closer to it. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Not yet. We came here for answers. We're going to find out what's really going on. Jake's grip tightened on her arm, his desperation evident. Anna, please. You don't know what you're dealing with. We don't know what that thing is. It could be anything. And we're not prepared for this. For the first time, Anna could see the fear in Jake's eyes. It was real, raw. But in that moment, she couldn't feel it. Not yet. There was something pulling her forward, something that whispered in the back of her mind. She knew that if she didn't face this now, it would haunt her forever. Stepping forward, she reached out toward the mirror, her fingers trembling. As soon as she touched the glass, a chill ran through her body, and for a split second, she saw something, someone move behind her in the reflection. It wasn't Jake. It was a shadow, a figure too vague to make out, but it was there, and it was coming closer. Anna! Jake shouted, his voice cracking with fear. Get away from it! But it was too late. The moment her fingers made contact with the mirror, the world around her seemed to warp. The air thickened, and she felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in her chest. Her vision blurred, and the room around her seemed to stretch and contract, as though the mansion itself was alive, breathing in sync with her every movement. Something pulled at her, something powerful, something ancient. And then, as quickly as it had all begun, the world around her went dark. When the darkness lifted, Anna was no longer standing in the room with Jake. She was somewhere else, and she had no idea how to get back. Anna's breath caught in her throat as she blinked into the overwhelming darkness. The cold, damp air around her felt suffocating, heavy with a strange, oppressive weight. She tried to move, but her legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, as though the very floor was holding her in place. Panic surged through her, but before she could react, a faint light appeared in the distance. It flickered like a dying flame, casting eerie shadows against the walls of what seemed like a narrow corridor. The walls were rough stone, far removed from the crumbling old mansion she had just been in. The light drew her in, pulling her toward it despite every instinct telling her to run. She could hear something in the distance, soft whispers, distant but unmistakable. They were calling her name, or perhaps they were trying to warn her. The deeper she went, the louder the whispers became, until they seemed to drown out everything else. She felt a chill settle in her bones, her mind screaming for clarity, but everything felt so wrong. There were no windows here, no sign of time. The air was thick with decay, and the floor beneath her feet seemed to shift, as though it weren't solid at all. Each step she took felt as if the ground could collapse beneath her at any moment. Her pulse hammered in her ears, every breath coming out in shallow, ragged gasps. The whispers grew louder, no longer vague murmurs, but clear voices, echoing through the chamber. "Leave this place. Leave now." One voice urged, its tone desperate, trembling. "She's coming." Another hissed, colder, more menacing. Anna's heart pounded harder in her chest. She. Who was she? What was happening? The light ahead grew stronger, drawing her closer. She felt herself moving as if compelled by an invisible force, the whispers urging her forward, pulling her deeper into the darkness. The corridor twisted and turned, seemingly endless, until it opened into a vast chamber. The light came from a large, cracked mirror in the center of the room, its surface gleaming with an unnatural glow. Anna froze as she saw what stood before the mirror. A figure. But it wasn't her reflection. It was a woman. A pale, ghostly figure, dressed in tattered white robes, her hair wild and unkempt. She was staring directly at Anna, her eyes hollow and dark, as if they had been drained of life. The woman's lips parted, and the words that came from her mouth were slow, deliberate, deliberate, as though each syllable were taking all her strength. "Why did you come?" the woman whispered, her voice almost a sigh. "Do you seek the truth? Or do you want to join me in the endless darkness?" Anna felt a shiver crawl down her spine, and yet she couldn't pull away. The figure's presence was magnetic, like it had a hold on her, pulling her into the void between reality and whatever nightmare lay in this place. "I didn't want to," Anna whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know why I'm here. I just—" the woman interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp, filled with rage. Her eyes flashed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You know why you're here, Anna. This is where you belong." Anna took a step back, her feet sliding against the cold stone floor. The whispers began again, now louder, swirling around her, a cacophony of voices that seemed to fill the entire chamber. The woman's form wavered before her, flickering like a dying flame. Behind the woman, the mirror began to crack, splitting down the middle. The sound was deafening, like glass shattering inside her skull. As the cracks spread, the air grew thick, oppressive, and the temperature plummeted. Anna's breath came in frozen gasps. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. It felt as though the walls themselves were closing in, trapping her in this nightmare. The woman stepped forward, her eyes now glowing with a sickly yellow light, and Anna could feel the weight of her gaze like a physical force pressing against her chest. "Do you see now?" the woman hissed, her voice twisted with fury. "Do you understand? You never should have opened the door. You never should have crossed the line." Anna's hands trembled as she reached out to touch the mirror, but before she could, a sharp cry split the air. "Jake!" His voice echoed from somewhere beyond the chamber, his panic clear even from a distance. "Anna! Where are you?" She turned toward the sound, but the woman's laughter stopped her cold. It was low, guttural, like the sound of dry leaves scraping against a gravestone. "You cannot save him," she spat. "You're too late." Anna's mind raced, her heart pounding as the mirror cracked further, the shards glowing ominously in the shifting light. The whispers grew louder, blending into an unintelligible murmur, a chorus of voices that seemed to be growing more desperate. Suddenly, a force yanked Anna backward, as if something invisible was dragging her away from the mirror, away from the woman. Her feet slid across the stone floor as the chamber began to tremble, the very foundation of the place groaning under some unseen pressure. The walls shifted, warping, closing in. Anna could feel the air tightening around her, suffocating her. "Asterisk, you can't escape, asterisk." The woman's voice rang out one last time, before everything went silent. And then, just as suddenly, the light around her vanished. The mirror cracked one final time, and with it, everything fell into darkness. The darkness was absolute, suffocating. For a moment, Anna was frozen in place, unable to move or even breathe. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, each thought shattering into another, each question rising like smoke, but there were no answers. The cold, oppressive silence stretched on, heavy as lead. She felt herself slipping, losing her grip on reality as everything around her seemed to dissolve into the void. And then, just as she thought she might lose herself to the nothingness, a faint sound broke through the quiet. A whisper. "Anna!" Her name. The voice was faint but unmistakable, familiar. It sent a jolt of energy through her, and she snapped back to attention, her heart pounding again. It was Jake. "Jake!" she called out, her voice shaking as she reached into the darkness, trying to find any sign of him, any trace of life. There was no response at first, just the echo of her own words bouncing back at her. Panic began to claw at her chest again, but then, another sound. A footstep. Soft, hesitant, but real. "Jake!" she called again, stepping forward, her hands brushing against the air, feeling the invisible weight of the room pressing against her as if the walls themselves were trying to hold her in place. She couldn't see anything, couldn't make sense of the shadows around her, but she could feel him. She could feel his presence. He was here, somewhere in the blackness, just out of reach. Suddenly, there was a shift in the air, a sudden warmth, a flicker of light that made her squint. Slowly, a shape emerged from the darkness. It was Jake. He stood there, motionless, his back to her, but something was wrong. His body was stiff, unnaturally so, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tight. "Jake!" Anna cried, rushing toward him. But as she took a step, a terrible, guttural laugh echoed from the shadows around them. The sound sent a chill straight to her bones. It was cold, mocking, and it was not Jake's voice. She froze. "Do you really think you can save him?" The voice rasped from the dark, its tone filled with cruel amusement. Anna's pulse spiked. The laughter echoed again, and she realized it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus of voices, whispers and shrieks that seemed to come from every direction. Her mind raced. What was happening? Jake, what's going on? Anna reached out to touch him, but as her hand moved closer, his figure flickered. The light around him warped, distorting, and then, just as her fingers grazed his arm, his body jerked away from her touch, his face twisting into a grimace of agony. No. No, this isn't real. Anna gasped, backing away. She wanted to run, to get away from this nightmarish scene, but something was keeping her rooted in place, as if the very air had turned into thick molasses. Help me! Jake's voice suddenly broke through, frantic and desperate, but it was distorted, warped. Anna, help me. They're inside me. I can't. Before she could react, Jake's body began to change. His form rippled like water, shifting and distorting. His eyes rolled back into his head, and his body spasmed violently, as though something was trying to escape from within him. Anna's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't Jake. It couldn't be. The person standing before her was no longer human. He was something else. His skin turned pale and ashen, his features melting into a grotesque version of himself. His mouth opened, and a hollow, echoing voice emerged, one that wasn't his, that couldn't have been his. You think you can break free from this place? The voice crooned, its tone dark and sinister, its echo filling every corner of the room. There's no escape, Anna. No one leaves. Anna's heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she was paralyzed with fear. She didn't know if she was hallucinating or if this was some new, twisted reality the mansion had trapped her in. The creature that had taken Jake's place stepped forward, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow, the edges of its form blurring as though reality itself was tearing apart around them. In the distance, Anna could hear the whispers again, rising in volume, growing frantic. Leave. 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 It's too late. The creature grinned, its expression wide and unnatural, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Too late, Anna. You should have listened. Now, you will join us. The thing, if it could even be called that, reached toward her, its fingers elongating into claw-like talons, grasping at the air, and for the first time, Anna felt her body jerk backward as though she were being pulled toward it by an invisible force. "No!" she screamed, fighting against the pull. But it was no use. The more she struggled, the tighter the grip became, until her chest felt as if it were being crushed by an unseen weight. And just as she thought she might be consumed by this nightmare, the whispers surged again, louder than before, their words urgent, desperate. Asterisk, the mirror, the truth. You have to break it. Asterisk. The voice from the shadows hissed, furious. You can't escape the truth. You're already ours. There's no going back. Anna's mind raced as the creature's grip tightened, its presence smothering her. But then, through the chaos, through the terror, something inside her clicked. The mirror, the cracks, the reflection. She had to find it. She had to break it, whatever it took. With every ounce of strength she had left, Anna broke free from the pull, her body lurching forward, the darkness swirling around her. She turned, eyes wide, and saw it. The shattered mirror, glowing faintly in the distance, its surface still cracked and warped. The figure, the woman, was gone, but the reflection of Anna, standing with a desperate look in her eyes, remained. Anna didn't hesitate. She rushed toward it, her hands reaching out for the broken shards, for the truth that had eluded her for so long. And as her fingers touched the cold, jagged glass, everything around her seemed to fracture, splintering into 1,000 pieces. The tension in the air reached its breaking point. The room, the voices, the creature, they all began to fade. And in that moment, as the mirror shattered completely, Anna finally understood. She wasn't just trying to escape. She was trying to survive. The moment Anna's fingers brushed the mirror's shattered surface, the world seemed to unravel around her. It wasn't just the room that fractured, it was everything. The shadows swirled like a violent storm, and the floor beneath her feet buckled as though the foundation itself was being ripped apart. The whispers, once frantic, turned into a chaotic crescendo, an overwhelming cacophony that filled her mind. Her pulse raced, her chest heaving as she fought to keep her bearings in the disorienting chaos. For a split second, she thought she was going to collapse under the weight of it all, but then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. The air stilled. The whispers faded. And everything went silent. Anna blinked. She was no longer in the cavernous room. She stood in the middle of a different place. Familiar, but wrong. It was the mansion, yes, but everything looked reversed. The hallway stretched out in front of her, but the walls were intact, no cracks or damage. The air smelled of dust, but there was a sharpness to it that made Anna feel cold. She was still holding onto the shards of the mirror, her fingers trembling. The silence around her felt suffocating. Then she heard it. Footsteps. She turned, heart pounding. There, standing at the far end of the hall, was Jake. But this time, he wasn't the broken, distorted figure from before. He looked normal, too normal. His face was calm, serene even, as if nothing had ever happened. As if the last few moments had been nothing more than a dream. "Jake!" Anna whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled at her, but there was something unsettling about it. It wasn't a smile of relief or joy. It was an empty, knowing smile, like someone who had already seen the end of the story and knew exactly how it would play out. "Anna," he said, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. "You're finally awake." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, awake?" Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step toward her, his movement slow, deliberate. His eyes, though calm, were too steady, too unnerving. Anna instinctively took a step back. "You've been trapped here for so long," he continued, his voice now softer, almost like a lullaby. "This place isn't what it seems. None of it is." Anna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but her throat felt dry, constricted. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in around her, as though the mansion itself was watching her, waiting for her to understand something. Everything you've seen," Jake said, his eyes narrowing. "It was all part of the game. The game we've been playing for years." Anna felt a cold wave wash over her. "What game?" "Jake, I don't understand. What's happening?" Jake's smile grew wider, and the air around them seemed to thicken, the very atmosphere pressing down on her. "You're in it, Anna. You always have been." Suddenly, the pieces began to click into place. The mansion, the mirror, the voices, the woman. It was all connected star. But what did it mean? Was it some kind of twisted reality? A trap? No, it couldn't be. Anna shook her head, trying to make sense of it all. "What do you mean, I've always been in it?" she demanded, her voice rising. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, his face shifted again, like a mask slipping. His eyes, once calm, now gleamed with a dark, twisted light. "You've been here, Anna. In this mansion. In this world," he said, each word slow and deliberate. "This is where you've always belonged. This is your reality." Her heart dropped. "What are you talking about?" "I'm not Jake," he said, his voice suddenly distant, hollow. The words hung in the air, sharp and biting. "He died a long time ago. And you've been living in this nightmare ever since. Your mind created this reality, to hold on to the only thing you had left. But none of it was real. You've been trapped in this place, feeding off the memory of what you lost. Anna stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. It felt as if the ground had just been pulled out from under her. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. This isn't real." But as the words left her mouth, the walls around her began to shift, warping, bending, until they were no longer solid. She looked down at the floor, and the wood seemed to ripple like water. The mansion was shifting, and as she turned back to Jake, his form flickered, distorting like a glitch in a computer screen. "You created this," the figure that had once been Jake said, its voice low, almost pitying. "You built it to keep yourself safe, to keep the memory of what you loved. But it was never real. It was never him." Anna fell to her knees, her mind reeling. It couldn't be true. It couldn't. She refused to believe it. But deep down she knew. This wasn't the mansion she had known. These weren't the people she had loved. The reality she had been living in, every hallway, every room, was a fabrication, a construct of her mind. And she was still trapped here, bound to this endless cycle. The figure that had been Jake loomed over her now, his face twisting into something unrecognizable. "The game's over, Anna. There's no way out anymore." The walls began to collapse around her, the mansion crumbling into nothingness, piece by piece. The darkness returned, swallowing everything whole. And as Anna's screams echoed through the void, the last, unexpected twist revealed itself in the form of one final voice. A voice that wasn't Jake's. "Asterisk, you're still mine, Anna. Forever, asterisk." And with that, the world went black. The darkness was overwhelming, yet it didn't feel final. Anna could feel herself slipping further into the void, the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. Her thoughts were scattered, fragile, like pieces of glass ready to shatter. But then, through the blackness, a flicker of light appeared, a soft glow, as if something deep within her was awakening. She didn't know how long she'd been lost in that endless darkness, but something inside her refused to give up. She wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. Slowly, as if she were emerging from a deep fog, her surroundings began to solidify. The walls, the floor, the air, everything came back into focus, piece by piece. It was the mansion again, but it looked different this time. It was no longer the twisted, decaying place it had been, but something new, something more. Alive. Anna stood, shakily at first, and then more confidently, as the pieces of the puzzle clicked together in her mind. She remembered the mirror, the whispers, and Jake's distorted form. She remembered the truth that had been buried beneath layers of fear and grief. The mansion wasn't a place. It wasn't some haunted house trapping her in a nightmare. It had always been inside her, a reflection of her mind, shaped by the trauma of losing the people she loved. Jake had died. The mansion, the memories, the twisted reality, they were all manifestations of her grief. It wasn't the mansion that was cursed, it was her. And until she confronted the pain she had been running from, she would never be free. With a deep breath, Anna walked forward. The mansion's hallways stretched out before her, but this time they didn't feel suffocating. They felt like a path, a journey to the truth. Each room she passed seemed to speak to her, not in words, but in the gentle flicker of light, the subtle warmth in the air. It was as if the mansion was showing her a new way, a way to move forward. As Anna moved deeper into the house, she finally reached the heart of the mansion, the place she had avoided for so long. The room with the mirror, the one that had shattered her reality. But now, the mirror was whole again. It wasn't cracked, distorted, or glowing ominously. It was simply a mirror, its surface smooth and clear. She stepped toward it, and this time she didn't flinch. She looked into it, not expecting to see anything out of the ordinary. But as her reflection stared back at her, she saw something different. A woman standing tall, strong, her eyes steady with resolve. It wasn't just the Anna she had known, the one lost in fear. It was the Anna who had fought through the darkness, who had finally accepted the truth. A single tear slid down her cheek, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was one of release. The weight that had crushed her chest for so long began to lift. She wasn't just facing the past anymore. She was embracing it, accepting it. And in doing so, she was freeing herself from the endless cycle of pain that had bound her. For the first time in what felt like forever, Anna smiled. She knew she wasn't completely healed. Grief didn't vanish overnight. But she had taken the first step toward healing. The mansion had been a prison, but now it was her path to freedom. And as she turned away from the mirror, she realized that she wasn't alone. The people she had lost, the memories she had cherished, were still with her, within her, not in the mansion, not in the twisted reality she had created, but in the love and strength she carried forward. The mansion began to fade, the walls crumbling away like dust, leaving only the soft light behind. And as Anna stepped into the light, leaving the shadows behind, she knew she had finally found the way out. There would be pain ahead, yes. There would be struggles. But for the first time in a long time, Anna felt like she could face it. She was no longer running from her past. She was walking toward her future. And as the last remnants of the mansion disappeared, she stepped forward into a new world, one of her own making. A world where the darkness no longer had control. The story was over, and Anna was finally free.